Good evening, televiewers. Welcome to another edition of Prime Hour on My Media Prime. Today is World Democracy Day. As the day is celebrated across the world, we're going to look at what this concept of democracy has been able to bring to Africa as a continent. Many persons are asking whether democracy is an African thing at all. Has it helped to move Africa forward, or stagnating the continent, or even taking it behind compared with other continents that are practicing this way of life called democracy? We are going to be talking on this lone topic with our panelists who are seated already in the house. We have Walang Abang Michael. He is a civil society leader and educationist. Good evening, all the way from Boya, and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Bean. Good evening, viewers and dear panelists, for being here today. It is always an honor for me to be here to edify the viewers out there on pertinent issues, especially this crazy thing called democracy. Thank you very much.
Also with us is, he was already accusing me before the program even started, Apostle Ambe Valentine Ngwa, a man of God, political analyst, and I don't know, he wears many caps. Good evening and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Liu. Thank you, Cameroonians and viewers of Prime Hour. It's always an opportunity to be here and to educate the masses, the viewers all over the nations of the world. I'm happy to be here this evening to discuss on this subject, democracy. Thank you. Also with us is a Pan-Africanist. I thought that it was very, very important, necessary for him to be part of this discussion today. He was here yesterday. He's called Andre Natemi Bako. Anytime we discuss, he would not want to hear about democracy. Tell us what you think about the concept of democracy. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Mr. Leo, and I thank the viewers at this hour of My Media Prime to see how our ideas and our opinions are able to reconstruct our nations and our continent when it has to do with the context of democracy. I would not say I am really much against democracy, but I'm just simply trying to say that it has to be redefined in the context of the African spirit.
Okay, I will start with you, Apostle Ambe Valentine. When we talk of democracy, what do we understand? It's a word that is used almost every day by many persons across the globe, and Africa, Cameroon in particular. Can we really let our televiewers understand what this concept is all about?
Thank you, Mr. Leo, for this honor again and the privilege to address the issue of democracy. Democracy is an ancient system of government introduced in Greek in the 503 and 504 BC, and it was introduced by a Greek philosopher. It came from two words, demo and kratos. Demo stands for a group of people in a city or a nation. Kratos stands for govern or rule. So in normal term, democracy is a rulership by majority. So what democracy means is a situation whereby it is a majority that decides and calls the shots. So it's an ancient word, and it was later on in 1779 improvised by the French and the Americans, and it became now an issue that spread across the nations of the world. But you know that before democracy ever came into existence, there was monarchy everywhere. And the monarchical system of government that existed before the democratic system came, we're going to be doing a comparison, contrasting these two kinds of government to see which one has created more trouble. But to the best of my understanding, democracy is not as bad as it is, but I'm talking about the democracy that was introduced into the continent Africa. Because what was actually defined as democracy from the Western world, beginning from the Greek, extended to the French and the Americans, and brought to Africa, it is a total distortion of the particular subject called democracy. So since we are delving into issues that has to do with the African society, we're going to be talking how democracy has affected Africa positively or negatively, and where is democracy actually practiced in Africa, and the benefits of democracy and the disadvantages. But let's deal with the African tongue context, because the subject democracy itself is not actually bad as per se, but what was introduced to Africa, I don't think it should be called democracy. It should be called democracy.
Yeah, that is what I want you to tell our televiewers. Why would you see the concept of democracy as practiced in Africa different from what is universally applied?
It is because the tenets that guides democracy have been misused or abused in the continent Africa. Because if at all we say democracy is rulership by the majority, in most African countries is a minority that rules. If you look at it critically, a few individuals coupled with the head of state of each nation is one that called the shots of the nation, with the help of imperialists who are trying to introduce and push forward their intentions and their agenda, which means the masses are working at the expense of a few persons. Like my friend Adrian will always say, the 85 against the 15 against the 85. So if you look at it critically, the subject democracy is not actually applicable in the continent Africa in most cases, not all, because the actual philosophy and the notion of democracy has not been enacted in the continent Africa. Instead for the majority to rule, it is a minority that rules. So that word democracy, even though we call it, and we have improvised democracy in Africa until we have advanced democracy, we have guided democracy, which is another word term, autocracy. And an autocrat is a dictator in a nutshell. So we have advanced democracy and guided democracy in Africa, which are system of government that those who even introduce democracy, they don't have in their system.
Now, I don't know whether Wellang sees it that way as applied in Africa. How would you describe the democracy that is applied in our continent?
Well, to talk about democracy in the context of Africa, you have to look at the African society and then try to see whether it can fit in. You know, when we talk of majority ruling, it means that implicating the people in the system of government of countries. Professor Ambe, Apostle Ambe, pardon me, Apostle Ambe just said that in Africa it is the minority that rules, and sadly, it is the minority that rules with a lot of repression. It is not only, you know, it's not only ruling and enjoying the how do I call it, the precepts of ruling, but ruling with repression and making sure that the national cake or the cake in the nation is enjoyed just by a few people. So that in reality is not democracy. If we refer to what Julius Nyerere, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere in Tanzania said about democracy, he said it should be an inclusive, you know, spirit where all the people. I want to go a little further or above what Apostle Ambe said. Julius Nyerere said it was possible to include everybody, to include everybody at the level of the local communities. It is not, you know, a kind of system of government where decisions are taken only at the top. But everybody at the level of the community, power can be divulged to the local community, where people will have a say on the how do I put it, on their daily life, the decisions that concern them. So I think that in Africa we have given the wrong concept of democracy, as Apostle Ambe said. We really need to have to redefine. To me, the African democracy where we, you know, scramble for power, to me is a farce. Because in reality, Professor P.L.O. Lumumba says there are no political parties in Africa. That there are small ethnic gatherings where it is only ethnic groups that pledge their allegiance. And when one of such parties is in power, or one of such, a ruler who belongs to one of such parties, it is his community that claims the rulership of that country. They kind of take the rulership of that country hostage and say it is their personal thing. And anybody who wants to share of the national cake through corruption, through embezzlement, has to belong to that political organization. So P.L.O. Lumumba says that the African man doesn't believe in any political ideology. They believe in ethnic gatherings, like a party coming from, say, the eastern region of Nigeria. That's where you find all the people.
We are going to be coming to that. How would you describe democracy, Andrin, from the African perspective? You have always seen problems with the way democracy is being implemented.
Well, let me answer that question directly by saying that these are all Western strategies in order to colonize and globalize the world in terms of civilization, which in my view is not something which speaks well for the African continent, because you cannot apply one rule and expect the whole world to use. It doesn't work that way, because people come from different beliefs and different traditions and cultures. So we as Africans, we have a system before the transatlantic slave trade. So democracy, which has trapped us today, like a clear example will be what we are seeing today in Zimbabwe, where Mugabe has led there for 2 decades. And after he went down, we saw that the new president right now is calling for reforms and giving back, paying billions of dollars to the farmers that Mugabe seized their lands from. So you come to realize that, you come to see that this kind of a level at which the African member states have been trapped at the level of the IMF and the World Bank, which is all under the United Nations. You see, the United Nations was formed at a time when the Western imperialists saw the need to colonize the entire Africa and to keep it for thousands of years at their exploit to their own advantage. That is where they instituted the United Nations, to draw in all the member states which they had told their colonial masters to give to give them independence, which we knew that with a lot of the African countries today are not independent at the level even at the United Nations. So democracy at that point, which is put there as a one world system of governance of all the member states that are at the level of the United Nations, this president in Zimbabwe, which is a clear example, is not able to keep the spirit of Africanism in Zimbabwe, because they have told him at the level of the IMF and the World Bank that they are not going to give him loan to continue run his government and build his nation if he does not pay back and give the lands back to the whites that lost the land. So you come to realize that the African democracy, it is attached at the level of that global front. And that is why I said that I don't believe in democracy, because if you go to the UN National Security Council, there are 5 countries which are unchangeable. These are permanent members. And you cannot talk about democracy when you have leaders that you can never change till democracy ever leaves, till Christ comes. So this is not democracy, and that is why I keep using the word that it is the minority that controls the majority, because these 5 nations are the ones that shape the entire world till today that we still speak. And that is why you realize that in conflicts in many African countries, the UN is not able to play its role, because it is attached to these 5 levels of people who have interest in Africa, so they cannot take decisions that is in the favor of the African people. And that is why we are saying that democracy in the context of African continent must be redefined, because we must not live together. We must learn to live together by living apart. We must then apply the system of globalization and civilization. This is where we are losing all our good values. This is where we are losing our own way of life, because today when a man leaves Europe and come here, he is regarded like a demigod, which is a mentality which I think that it is something that we need to reorientate ourselves to understand that I don't see how a continent can be this rich and yet it is poor, that they have named it at that global front that it is a third world nation. So there are times where, these are times where we need to redefine those things and restructure ourselves, because there is a challenge here, Mr. Liu. In 2050, they are already viewing the population of Africa to 2.4 billion population, which is already showing a greater labor force in the entire world. That means that Africa is going to take that economic role that China has played for many years, because we are beating the world population at the level of 2050 for 2.4 billion people. Now the population rate of China is stagnant. Europe is stagnant. They don't believe in marriage. China, you get more than 2 children, you pay for the 3rd one. So people are afraid to have children. But Africa is a young population growing country and has the largest land in the world. So there is a need for the depopulation of Africa, and that is why I keep using the word the 15% against the 85%. That means that at the level of the United Nations, we are if you look at their documents, they say these are 193 sovereign states, which is not true, because we don't have sovereignty. We are using a currency of a different nation, and that nation is exploiting us. We still pay taxes for using their currency.
Apostle, you raised the issue of a minority ruling over the majority, but we can't have the majority ruling, because the powers that the President of the Republic is benefiting or enjoying now has been handed over to them by the majority of the people. How do we explain that? Because even in the United States of America and other countries, it's not the majority ruling.
No, it is always the minority ruling the majority, because we don't have positive and good electoral codes in the first place. The issue is the people who call the majority are the ones that are supposed to decide the leader. But far be it that population decide the leader. Before elections we hold in Africa, we already know the winner through manipulation of ballot boxes. That's the first abuse of democracy. The second abuse, where I say that the majority rules the minority, is because most of the people who are at the grassroots, do not make decisions as far as the state is concerned. The authorities that be are not being voted into power. They are being manipulated into power. How do you explain that somebody stays in power for 30 years? Somebody stays in power for 50 years? That's not democracy. Because democracy is actually an exchange of power from one hand to another. And if somebody stays in power for many years, then there's no democracy. Because why? Even sometimes people get fed up and frustrated. The next point is that people cannot be complaining against an authority and still voting him in power. If you look at the masses, sometimes they are rioting against most of the authorities. Go to Togo, people rose in the streets. The millions of Togolese rose against foreign assembly is a clear indication that they are tired of the leadership. Go to Guinea-Conakry, the millions that rose up against Alpha Conde is a clear indication that they are tired. And now, if he wins election tomorrow, who are the people that voted him? Was it snails, dogs, cats, or some strange domestic animals that voted a man that population had earlier decried his stay in power? You come to now in Cote d'Ivoire, they have refused the candidature of Laurent Gbagbo, that refused of Guillaume Soro from getting to power. Now Alassane Ouattara is there. You and I know that Ivorians are very uncomfortable with the fact that Alassane Ouattara should go for a third term. But I'm going to surprise you that after the elections, the man that the population did not want will be the one to win. Who voted him? Stones, spirit, except these leaders in Africa have become God. That the proverbial scripture says that if you don't praise me, I will raise stones to praise me. I now see presidents have become gods in Africa, that the masses refuse to vote them. The leaves, the goats, the dogs, and the stones now vote them. So I can tell you with all sincerity that a man that the population has denied cannot win elections if they are clear.
Okay, if they are clear, now should democracy be applied differently in different continents?
Well, that is...
should democracy be contextualized?
In reality, if you go to the former Soviet Union, you know, they had their own definition of democracy. During the period of Stalin, they had their own definition of democracy, because the main ideological difference between the United States and Russia is in the former USSR was on the issue of democracy. America had their own definition of democracy, which they applied in their country and in the satellite countries that America, let me say the allied countries that supported America. Whereas Russia had its own definition of democracy, and this was also applied in those satellite countries like Poland, like Czechoslovakia, and the rest. So, but they said that, I mean, various camps during the Cold War said their own definition of democracy was contextual. It means that it was working in those countries or succeeding in achieving the aim that both sides wanted to achieve in the various countries. Now, come to Africa. I think that Africa has a history. Africa has a history of monarchies. You know, before the coming of the white man, we had rulers who were kings. I don't want to call them chiefs, because it is the white man who came and reduced them to the level of chiefs. Those were kings. Those were kings in entire kingdoms. But from the little history that I read about how those kingdoms were managed, I discovered that there was an element of democracy that is not even seen in the modern democracy today. There was massive participation of the people. There were instances in which the women were called to participate in decision making. There were instances in which the decision of the woman was even rated highly above the decision of the men. It means that we recognized, or the African society in those days recognized the value of the woman even more than the present society. There were instances where the minority, those who were disgruntled, their proposals were brought to the table and consideration was given because they did not want a set of people to be disgruntled inside the kingdom. So I think that there was a very high level of democracy that was practiced in those days, in those kingdoms, than the one which is practiced, than the one which is practiced now. Now, permit me to define the democracy that's practiced now in Africa. It will sway a little from what Apostle Ambrea said. What we are practicing in Africa is a system of government where the imperialists and a few people inside those African countries have come together to exploit the masses. And that is why, you know, during the Wind of Change in Africa, where democracy forcefully introduced itself in Africa, after that period, leaders who were there when democracy came have still been there till today. when the so-called white man democracy, because I understand that it is after the Cold War, where like the other panelists were saying, it is after the Cold War when the West wanted to ascertain itself in Africa,
yes,
that they imposed this idea of democracy, where you had the inclusion of political parties, but it was a fake democracy, and they themselves knew that. You know, it was a fake democracy, wherein their candidates could stay in power for more than 20 years, or 30, or even 40. Take the case of, you know, many African countries, Central African. Cameroon is the case. You have Gabon, you have Central African Republic. I mean, just Malabo. That is the kind of democracy that is practiced in Africa. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that there are dictators. No. There are dictators who are doing what the people want, who are providing or who are delivering the goods to the people. I think the case of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, he's a dictator. You know, there are elections there and he wins. We don't know how he wins all those elections. But the Rwandan people are, you know, getting the trickling effect of what Paul Kagame is doing. But in other countries, it is a massive exploitation of the people. And the presidents or the rulers who are there perpetrate themselves in power forever. So I think that African democracy, as we say, has a lot to learn from the kingdoms of the pre-colonial days, or the kingdoms that existed during the pre-colonial days, wherein the people will be included. Take a case like Cameroon. Now, in the 1996 constitution, they say there is decentralization, but it has taken forever for decentralization to be implemented. And just imagine the problem that it has caused in the Cameroonian society, because we are unable to implement simple democratic principles, those that we have created ourselves. We are unable to implement it because we think that they are going to cut our power short. So I think African democracy has to be reviewed.
It has to be reviewed. Do you, like he says, think that Africans should come together, Andrew, and rethink their democratic practices? Taking, for example, how it is applied in some of these successful continents like Asia.
Yes, I think, like I still say that the word democracy is a very large subject that each person needs to see how it fits in your own society. It may not apply the same as in another person's own society, but at the end of the day, we should be able to apply things that works for us and not things that works against us, because we are trying to act by proxy. So I think that if Cameroonians or the African member states take a clear example like Asia, a country like Dubai, Israel, and many other countries, Malaysia, Indonesia, and you see the level of development which is taking place there, and you compare it to what Africa has, you ask the problem that, but what is really the problem of Africa? You come to realize that like I keep saying, that this democracy which is introduced to Africa was done intentionally to keep all the member states of Africa under subjection to the Western nation, and that is a simple truth, because the idea of forming the United Nations was to permanently enslave Africa through neo-colonialism. And that is why for Africa, in order to Africa to set itself free, it must be able to redefine and disassociate himself from that global front, and that means that it will take the African population to come together, because their only success is their unity. And that is why you realize that in the context of democracy, for example, in Cameroon you have about 253 parties, for example, but yet you already know the outcome of each elections. It's like I was told that the regional elections that are going to take place, is the government going to halt it or boycott it? I said no, it's for their interests. They are not going to boycott it, because that is their own mentality of democracy, doing things that works against your people. And that is why I said that the democracy that was brought in here by the Western nation has not been in the favor of the Africans. And that is why, if Africans are crying and protesting today and running into the, you see, Mr. Leo, the strategy here is too high, and I think that the African head of states and the African population needs to be educated to understand where where Africa has been locked. And that is where, if we are fighting for freedom or we are fighting for liberation, we should know where we need to take the battle to, because you cannot win a battle if you don't have the strong man who controls and makes decisions that affects your continent, your leaders, your democracy, your politics, including your religion and your education. So we are going nowhere, and that is why I'm saying that for a man to be independent, it's a man who knows how to charter his own destiny, and who has a vision that is unique to what the world offers. And that is why you realize that a country like Israel is able to survive in a desert. A country like Dubai, which is today now is become the world topmost country. These were countries that had nothing. They don't have the kind of resources that Africa has. So you come to realize that whenever a country has a bad leader, the people suffer, because you can never have democracy being practiced the way we are understood that democracy is supposed to be. I still say that, why do we need to review it? Because we are made to understand by facts and data evidences that our resources are being held down by the level of our colonial masters, and only 15% is given to us. I want to explain this strategy very well so that we can understand how we can break through, and that is what we see the ECOWAS bloc are doing today to retrieve back their reserves from France, because you cannot go anywhere if you don't have power and autonomy over your own natural resources. You are not going anywhere. Otherwise, your country will always be in poverty, and they will always use that a disadvantage of poverty to depopulate your country. So we must understand how democracy is in the agenda to depopulate the African population.
Okay. Good evening to you, Big Brother Bolinji, watching from the United States of America, and to you, Baba Kingsley, Fondon Richard. Good evening to you, Dingoke Nelvi. Good evening to you, Tabot rapper Ebubedike. Good evening to you, and to you, Moses Clinton, Metro Ondwa. Good evening to you. Also, I want us to clarify something. There are countries that are considered not to be democratic. For example, we have the case of President Obiangema of Equatorial Guinea. We had the situation of Libya, where Gaddafi was president for over 40 years, and then we have the case of Paul Kagame. Somebody raised the issue that he is a dictator. I'm sure it's you, Walang. But I want us to clarify the fact, because there is a debate ongoing on social media. People say, how can we say that Kagame is a dictator when he's loved by his people?
Okay. You see, the concept of democracy, as we are trying to define here, is different from what is being practiced in Africa. There are three different systems of governments being practiced in Africa in the name of democracy. There is a little bit of imperialism, geopolitics, and ethnocracy. Ethnocracy is when you are dealing with your ethnic group. For instance, if you go to the nation of Kenya, there are three different ethnic groups in that land. You have the Luos, which are the minority, you have the Gikuyus, and you have the Kalenjins. In the ethnocracy, when a Gikuyu becomes a president like Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta right now, the top machineries of the government become people from the Gikuyu clan. In the time of Aramwa, who came from the Kalenjins, when he became president, the top authorities came from that land. And then the minority, which are the Luos, have not been given the opportunity. The bad thing is this: when somebody is practicing ethnocracy, even if he is not perfect, the ethnic group he comes from support him because he is their own, not because he's benefiting the state. So if Kagame is called a dictator, is one thing. A dictator is not somebody in the actual sense who is wicked. Because the subject dictator is like, once you hear it, it is wickedness. It's not wickedness. There are positive and negative dictators. There are dictators who take power and they deliver the goods, and there are others who take power and stupefy it. That's two different kinds of dictator. Dictator is somebody who calls the shots. Kagame recently decided not to go in for elections. It was the parliament that sat down, revamped the constitution, and said, Papa, come back. That's a dictator we need. We are not afraid of dictators. We are afraid of stupid, nonchalant, insensible, and uncreative dictators.
Like the case of Gaddafi.
That's what we are talking about. Gaddafi made a desert in Libya and turned it into a city and a green wall. You cannot call a dictator a bad person. As long as he delivers the good and stays in power, he is a positive dictator. When you are calling shots when you are unable even to deliver the goods, it's bad dictatorship, because the subject or the concept of a dictator should be properly defined according to the African context. So when you see Africa, it is not democracy practice here. It is imperialism, plus ethnocracy, plus gerontocracy, and at the end we have geopolitics. This is why he operates. Somebody becomes an authority, he takes his ethnic people, put in power. He picks a few from different geographical areas, geopolitics, puts in power to shut the mouth of the masses there. As long as the head of those geopolitical areas are being well fed, the masses will be silenced. The imperialists is that they have their interests, and the president in power is being governed by them outside, while he governs the poor from what he gets outside. So we don't have democracy. It is gerontocracy plus geopolitics plus ethnocracy plus imperialism. So remove the subject democracy from the continent Africa, because what we practice here is not near democracy.
Yeah, but when you say they should remove this Walang Abang, we know that most of our presidents are elected. Is there a problem with their method of being elected, because they're chosen by the majority of the people? They're said to be chosen by the majority of the people. What's that?
If you take the case of Cameroon, I mean about 3 million people voted. Just mostly about 3 million people voted out of 24. So I begin to ask myself, what is the legitimacy of the president? You know, who is voted by 3 million people?
The breakdown is 3 point something million. Yes. But those who voted the president, but that's 1 point something.
But then in Africa, the Cameroon is not just the exception. In Africa, you have people like Obiangema Mbazoko, who is a good dictator, positive dictator, but who keeps on winning elections. There are people who oppose Obiangema. So the question is there real democracy practiced in those countries?
Yes,
is there real democracy practiced in Cameroon? You know, when you find the number of people who came out in the streets in 2008, you know, there was a massive protest against the regime in 2008, and today the regime is still there. So, you know, we begin to ask ourselves the question, is there real democracy? Even in nearby Nigeria, if we want to scrutinize what happened there, you have somebody like Atiku who went in for elections against Buhari, and there are allegations that Atiku won, and the victory was stolen from him on the basis that his ancestry is from Cameroon. You know, so is there real democracy in Nigeria? Is there not somebody, you know, masterminding the candidate and then having a heavy hand on who becomes the president? Now go to Egypt. Hosni Mubarak was ousted in Egypt, and the Muslim Brotherhood, you know, was elected. It was elected. When they came to power, they were overthrown, and RCC is there today. So is there democracy in Egypt? I say no, there's no democracy. The constitution has been revised, even in Egypt, a country like Egypt, where we thought that, you know, there was going to be an example of democracy. The constitution has been revised to keep RCC there in power till 2032. Is that democracy? No. If you go to Chad, neighboring Chad, there are many people who are opposing Idris Deby, and recently he gave himself the title of Field Marshal. Is there democracy in Chad? The answer is, you know, I don't want to get into the answer again. Africans should be guessing. If you go to Togo, that Apostle Lambe talked about, where there was a massive demonstration against President Faure Gnassingbé, and he still succeeded to win the elections. Is that democracy? I say no. If democracy really means, you know, alternation at the helm of power, then Africa is very, very far behind. I think that there are countries where dictatorship has worked, like Apostle Lambe and others have said. We acknowledge the fact. But in most of the countries of Africa, dictatorship has failed woefully. I think that if we are reviewing, because let us come to this now and then try to suggest a way forward. We should not only castigate, we should not only criticize the kind of democracy that operates in Africa. What is the way forward? I think that if we are reviewing the democracy of Africa, we should give the opportunity for power to alternate from one person to another. I think that that kind of democracy has worked in other places. Yes. I'm seeing a case like case study like Ghana, yes, where Nana Akufo-Addo is president. You see a new spirit that is coming in, and I think that, you know, the groundwork that was laid by Captain Jerry Rawlings is bearing fruits now, because anybody who comes wants to prove a point, and that is what Nana Akufo-Addo is doing right now in Ghana. When he proves his point, he cannot do everything for Ghana. If he's there, Ghana, I think Ghana is 5 years. Okay, yes. Ghana is 5 years. If he gets 2 terms and 10 years, and he does something, after that he should leave, and the opportunity should be given to another person to come and try the other possibilities. Because when one person stays there, it starts leading to clientelism. That is the case we have in many of our countries, African countries south of the Sahara, including where we are right now, and even neighboring Nigeria. We know that even though power is alternating in neighboring Nigeria, there are people who call the shots. And we start asking ourselves, is that real democracy? The answer is no. The people should be able to freely choose their leadership. That is democracy. When the people participate freely and that power is divulged from the top to the bottom, so that the people take part in the decision-making process, so that they don't feel that people are being policies or decisions are being imposed upon them. Let's take the case of the northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon. Those are integral parts of this country, but there is an ongoing conflict, and we know that the people who have been voted in the past legislative and even municipal elections cannot access the places where they were voted. So who actually voted for those people? You know, is democracy being applied at that level? The answer is a big no. So I think that we should sit down as Africans and try to work out what is going to work for Africa as far as democracy is concerned.
Now, let's look at this concept of democracy, like we say, that you say it is the majority that decides who governs. Let's take the case of Cameroon. Did we see the majority govern? We follow the constitution. The constitution says the persons with the highest number of votes in an election is declared winner. That is what the constitution says. It doesn't necessarily consider whether it is half or more than half of the people who vote for you or not.
Well, normally that is the way it is supposed to look like. And I think that the essence of democracy it goes way back in the Bible, in history, even before Christ. It goes way back. And that is just a way that God allowed man to be able to exploit his own human resources. So today, in the modern days, like we see in Europe, it works in Europe, and that is why Europe at a certain level is doing better, even though they almost have nothing.
Yes.
Because you realize that if, for example, a leader is giving 4 terms, they make it in such a way that as long as that country is going to exist, is going to exploit all its human resources that are able to bring in something that the country will head forward. That means keep bringing new ideas that the other man could not see, bringing new other faces with developments and other innovations that the other man did not do. That was the essence of democracy, whereby the people elect or they choose a leader that they know that this man is going to take them forward. Now, for example, like he also rightly said, it is not in the area of how long a person sits in power. As long as he sits and keeps delivering what the people need, nobody ever complained. We saw in the days of Moses, when Moses got at the level where he lost vision, God requested him to hand power over to another person, because the man whom God was asking him to give power to was a man who had a foresight which Moses could not see. So the essence of democracy is to exploit in each nation or a race or a people the resources that are in them to exploit what God has put in the world, so that man should not complain. But what we're having today in this our own kind of democracy in Africa, like he rightly said, there are 3 different types. But the type which is being practiced here, it is the one which we believe that is the elders that are to make decisions, and then the youth only remain at the level of compliance. And this is where it needs to change, because all men or the elder people are giving dreams and not vision. Vision is meant for those who will carry people forward, those who have seen what an old man only dreams about, because he needs energy. For example, like the man in Konabidie, who is going in for another term in Côte d'Ivoire. That man is older than Gbagbo and is on a wheelchair. How do you take, for example, if he has to go and attend a meeting in Belarus or to go and attend a meeting in China, in his condition he cannot go. So it means that in places of leadership where each nation is supposed to have a democratic system that favors its people, you need energetic and young and visionary oriented, entrepreneur minded citizens to forge that nation. Because at the end of the day, Mr. Leo, vision is having the ability to create an idea that will benefit your society, which nobody has dared to that area. So we need people in Africa who have vision, and not people who are there to exploit and keep the population at the detriment for them being up there. So these are the kind of leaders that we are saying that the problem is not about being there for long, because we have seen that it has played to the advantage of the Western nation, and that is why we are saying that at that level where we are being joined to at the level of the United Nations. The agenda behind this organization is not in the favor of the African people, because if the United Nations is there to build and to forge away liberation on all these colonies, it means that it should have been the first bodies to allow the African member state to build their own currency. And that is why you realize that in the ECOWAS zone, the president of Ghana is coming out building a new a monetary union to redraw their reserves from France, and France is also forging with Ouattara to allow the other French ECOWAS member countries to tie ECO to Euro. So you come to realize that the strategy here does not work for the African people, and that is why we are saying that let Africans be able to choose the kind of leaders that will give them the way forward to explore their destiny and their purpose in life. So we, at the end of the day, Mr. Liu, if a head eats and becomes big, it means there's no digestion, and that is what we see in the African countries. Our leaders are so extremely rich. A man who earns a salary of 240,000 francs does things like a billionaire, like Jack Ma, like Big Gay, and you ask yourself, but where does this man get the money from? That is the people's destiny that the man is sitting on top, because the power is not being shared to the people. They have seen the countries or the member state as an elephant which everybody in the administration and the Western nation goes there to get their own chunk, and the population of that country, which are the rightful owner citizens of those countries, don't have access to those things, and that is why we say it has to be reviewed.
Let's look at, since the topic has to do with democracy, whether it is making or destroying Africa, let's look at some key aspects, and then we look at how democracy is being applied in Africa. Okay, let me take one or two messages and then we continue, please. Good evening, Mr. Liu. I love your program. Thanks for unveiling some of the problems. It's Vandis writing from Kumba. Good evening to you people in the studio. According to me, democracy is just a name, as it's not being practiced. For example, if citizens of a particular area complains or are living deteriorating conditions in which it's real, and the state answers them by brutalization to an extent where some of the complainers lost their lives, where therefore is the democracy? Jeremy Rumi writing from Sabongari in Nwa. Good evening, Mr. Liu. I love your program, and I equally want to thank you for always bringing Apostle Ambe and Ibako for your programs. They are very good inspirational speakers. My regards to them. Is Jean Con writing from Jakiri. Good evening to you. I'm called Abel. There is no democracy in Africa. The only country where to practice democracy is South Africa. Good debate, Mr. Moderator. A very interesting debate from Barrister Titatang in Tiko. Good evening to you, Council. Good evening to you, Mr. Liu, and your intelligent panelists. Democracy in Africa is total waste of time. To me, the word should not even exist because in many African countries, dictators manipulate elections and stay in power for decades. That is not democracy, because their being there is against the wishes of the masses. If Africa don't redefine democracy properly and fit it into their own context, Africa will remain underdeveloped. Thank you very much, Apostle Ambe. Now let's look at the resources of African nations. How does democratic practices, how does democracy help in the equal sharing of the resources that a nation is endowed with in Africa?
In the actual sense, democracy is a system of government where wealth is supposed to be evenly distributed amongst the poor of the nation. From the head to the bottom, everybody has constitutional right and legal right to enjoy the spoils of the nation. And that is the actual concept of democracy. Because if you look at it critically, in the European Union, there is a certain level of democracy whereby even European nations that are not able to stand for themselves, other European nations support them, because democracy is washing my hand and wash your hand. But that is not the case here, because if we define the concept of democracy properly, we are going to know that it works perfectly well and it's a good system of government. But because of the way they have distorted the philosophy of democracy in Africa, it is affecting us negatively. I'll give you a simple example. A friend of mine traveled to Denmark and told me that once you go to the Danish system of education, if they look at, see that you are very intelligent, what they do is that they sponsor you, they keep you on a salary, then they send you back to your country of origin if you are a foreigner, to come and carry out feasibility studies and detailed research. Once you do the research, you carry it back to them. They pay you good money. They are in Denmark, but they know what is in your country. Now with their ambassadors here, they may come to our community and give some good amount of money to the mayor and develop the environment, and then they say we want to buy this piece of land. That piece of land is in reflection to the feasibility study that a Cameroonian who left Denmark came here, did it. When they buy that land, you don't see the importance of the land, but they have already dug what is under the land. They exploit it. Democracy is when you give everybody an opportunity to discharge what they carry inside of them. In ancient Israel, it says, Nebuchadnezzar saw a handwriting on the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Ophasin. It means I have weighed you on the balance and you have no weight. It says the king became worried. All the astrologers and the intelligent men in Babylon could not interpret the handwriting. They looked for a stranger. Democracy is when you don't just deal with citizens. But the democracy we have in Africa, that if you don't belong to a political party that is in power, no matter how intelligent and beneficial you are to that nation, you are not considered. Democracy does not work with party politics. Democracy does not work with ethnicity. Democracy does not work with geographical location. It works with the betterment of the nation. Whether you are an Arab, if you are in Cameroon and you have a value system that can plus the Cameroonian government, once we take note of you, we discover it.
Meritocracy.
Direct. The mother of the king said, there is a man in the kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy God. He has the capacity to interpret her sentences, to dissolve doubts, and he has the wisdom of the gods. This guy was not a Babylonian, he was an Israelite. And when they brought Daniel, Daniel weighed and read the handwriting and interpreted it. That is democracy, where there is a freelance and an opportunity for every individual to exploit their God-given talent and potential. So when we talk about the African context, if you don't belong to the party that be in power, no matter how intelligent you are not valued. That's not democracy. That is party politics, or if I'm permitted to create a new word in English, partitocracy. It is not democracy. The next thing is that, like I said, ethnicity and geopolitics is what is killing us. So if we talk about democracy in the African context, I can tell you the truth. There are people who don't know how to write their names, but because they belong to a ruling party, they are made mayors. Why? There are people in that community that have leadership capacity that can take the community to the next level. Why? Democracy has been taken out of context and partitocracy has taken him in power. You go and see a mayor who does not even know how to sign a marriage certificate, yet he is in power. Is that democracy? That's not democracy. You see some people who are even appointed parliamentarians, they cannot spell their names. They are in parliament. To parliament who? What laws are they going to draft and constitute to better the nation? Somebody is appointed a senator because he belongs to a party, because he has a competence. Democracy is when opportunity is given to every individual in that nation to work for the well-being of the nation. That's the reason why when Nana Akufo-Addo confronted the COVID-19 in Ghana, even the opposition parties joined their hands behind him and gave him an appraiser. They saw that because why? They saw the interest of the nation, not the interest of a party. That's how democracy is. So one of the things that the European democracy infiltrated Africa is party politics, the divide and rule system. You don't belong to a party. If me and Mr. Wallan come from the same village and he is SDM and CPD were enemies, people from the same ethnic group by party politics are being divided. That's the level of witchcraft that the African democracy is exhibiting.
Greetings to the panelists in the studio. Honestly, there is no democracy in Africa except for countries like Ghana and South Africa, which are credible institutions. I hear some panelists saying there is positive dictators. There is no such thing. The greatness of a leader is determined by how many great people he creates. That is his ability to multiply himself in others and creating very strong institutions. If he fails to do that, no matter how good he is, it will be destructive to the psyche of citizens, as they will believe in strong men rather than in strong institutions. That is the direct opposite of democracy. Maxima is writing from Boya. Ngupo Ngong writing from Kumba says, hello, Mr. Ngupo Ngong in Kale Street, Kumba. Greetings to you all, especially to Apostle Ambe. We really thank you for this kind of educative programs. As far as I am concerned, there is no democracy in Africa, but it is certain that nature will soon permit us to restore democracy in Africa, since most of our dictators have come of age. Okay. Democracy in Africa is government of children, by the children, and for the children. Okay, that is your definition. Good evening, Mr. Kum Leonard, and to you all in the house. Your programs are wonderful. It educates us over is no democracy in Africa. That's why you see bad government that makes people suffer, and that's why you see Africans trying to cross Sahara Desert, finding their way to Mediterranean Sea, looking for ways to get to Europe because of wicked government in Africa. Mohammed and friends writing from Morocco in Casablanca. Oh, Mohammed, my friend, greetings to you, and I hope we meet one day. Good evening to you all in the studios. It's very hard to practice good system of democracy in Africa because the concept of leadership is not in any way in favor of the masses. Diodune writing from Melon. Okay, this one says, good evening, Nganyu Kingsley from Bamenda. I wish to thank you for this selected topic. Any topic that has to do with Africa touches me so deeply. Your members of the panel you have selected is just perfect, and they are articulating the facts as it's supposed to be dealt with. Okay, now, is the concept of democracy in our African context being destroyed or abused by the type of leadership we have in Africa? Because somebody's saying that it also has to do with leadership. Leadership of, we have rulers, we have leaders, we have servant leaders. Is that not where the problem lies also?
Yeah, the truth is, you know, it's a pitiable situation. The concept of leadership is, you know, there is blatant abuse of the concept of democracy and leadership in Africa. Yeah, in Africa, it's mostly about the person building a court around the leader, around the ruler. I don't want to use a leader because leadership is something a little more, you know, with vision and everything. So it's building some kind of a personality cult around the ruler, instead of building institutions. Now, this is another aspect of democracy that so many people, you know, that is not respected in Africa. Building the institutions that will stay there, you know, and manage the affairs of the country for a period of time. In Africa, it is mostly, I don't want to say all about, it is mostly about building the person who is sitting there, so that everything that is done in the name of that person. There is nothing that is said, or there is nothing that is done in such countries when the name of the person in power is not mentioned. Our country is one of the examples. There are many other countries. But when you build the institution, because there are institutions, the presidency of a country is an institution, it is not a person. And when people understand that, I'll give an anecdote. You know, the great General de Gaulle, although he is responsible for all the suffering that these African countries are going through now, but General de Gaulle was a French man with vision. You remember that he is the one who led France, you know, to fight against the Germans during the Second World War. After the Second World War, General de Gaulle was made president of France, and he had his vision on how to get France out of the economic crisis. But he was blocked by the institutions, because in France, even France, the presidency is an institution, it's not the person. The institutions blocked de Gaulle. Yes. And what did de Gaulle do? This vision, he could not implement it by force, so he took his valise and went to his house. He went out of the presidency, and another government was formed. They tried to salvage the French economic situation. They could not succeed. And some people sat and said, hey, we think that de Gaulle's vision can work. And they went back to de Gaulle and called him. I think that is democracy. Yes. You know, where somebody doesn't stand above the institution. Because in most African countries, the person who would have been above the, at the helm of power, would have imposed himself. He would have said, I am the Alpha and the Omega. There is not, you know, my point stands. And unfortunately, in Africa, those people implement the wrong policies, policies that are geared against their people. And so when the people say no, instead of, you know, democratically abandon, no, I don't want to use the word abandon, instead of democratically relinquishing power in favor of somebody who has another vision, they use the police, they use the army, they use all the forces of law and order, you know, even to deal with the physical lives of their population to maintain themselves in power. So I always use this anecdote of General de Gaulle, who is responsible for all the trouble that many African countries, about 14 or 15 African countries are going through. That he had such a vision that was very clear and powerful. But when it came time to decide, he said, if the French people will not allow me to implement my vision, then I will retreat. And he left it. So I think that Africa should concentrate on this issue. I mean Africans, because it's not always about the Africans should wake up and start to concentrate on building institutions and not people. Because when we build people and those people leave, the country that stays behind is ruined. There is turmoil, and that's one of the reasons why there is a lot of wars in Africa as we speak now.
Okay, Andrew Ateme Bako, let's look at our democracy and the practice and the rule of law in our respective countries. We see we are very democratic. How does this democracy in our countries ensure that basic human rights are respected?
Well, I think
because almost every country in Africa says we are democratic. Yes, those are some of the factors. Do we really see it?
Well, that is the propaganda of the day, and it's like an umbrella for anybody or any government to use in manipulating the people in the name of democracy. But like I will still say, it is very important for us to understand how much this democracy that we are acting by proxy has really destabilized and is affecting Africa till today. You see, poverty is not the absence of capital. It is the absence of a lack of vision. And democracy on its own is meant for people who have visions. I'll give you a very good example. The people The people who control the world today are not presidents. They are the world's richest or the world genius. They call them the billionaires, like the Bill Gates and the Jack Ma and the so on and so forth. These are the people who stand behind organizations that the governments of the world depend on to function. And they are the ones sponsoring this organization and actually enforcing their own way of vision through this organization to shape the world where it is going to. So what we need in our leadership is not presidents, or it is not so-called dictators. We need visionaries, people who can take nothing and create something out of it, and not people who take from something and then waste it and it becomes nothing, where at the end of the day his people do not get it. So democracy, in my own view, is when the country blossoms, because we saw that in Israel. When Israel left Egypt and entered into Canaan through the hand of Joshua, God instituted a system which is a system that is being practiced in the European democracy, whereby all Israel would give tithe to the certain tribe called Levi to alleviate poverty from Israel, because God just took the people from a very worse experience of slavery and was bringing them into land which he called milk and honey. And that is why today people run to go to America and go to Europe, because they apply those same principles there. And even our leaders still take the money, the embezzle that they have borrowed from the IMF, and still go and store in those Western banks, and then the bank give it to their citizens to come and invest again in Africa. So you look at the chain, it begins to go. You realize that the problem we have in Africa, these are demonic leaders. And that is why I'm saying that in order for us to move forward, we have to not only redefine it, but we need to take very drastic measures concerning this kind of leader. I'll still say the same example like I said last time. In 2001, I was in Holland and I saw what happened in Rotterdam, where a mayor was elected and he was a racist, but he was a white man and he was a homosexual. It took the body of Christ, the black church community, to come together and decree. I was part of that meeting and said, this man is not going to rule in this area. And it took 2 weeks. This man's mandate ended. What I'm trying to tell you is that, Mr. Leo, we need people like Idahosa. We need people like Jack Ma who can be president. People who began from nowhere. These are people who didn't go to school. Bill Gates did not go to school. They do investments that they don't have an idea about. But because a visionary is somebody who always want to direct people into where people have never been to, who want to bring in the supernatural into the natural, where man begins to feel comfortable and understand that he has the ability to become what God wants him to be. And these are the kind of leaders, and that is why when it got to a certain level, we saw this in Israel. God told Moses, give this to Joshua, because God understood that only a man who has seen far can take a people there. A man who does not see does not need to be a leader. So true democracy is what, each time in a nation where you see people begin to cry, there is conflict, there is war, know that a leader has lost vision. It's not about money. Cameroon has enough money, for example. Africa has enough resources. But the problem in Africa is bad leadership, and this is in conjunction with their colonial master and in compliance with the citizens, because I cannot understand how Cameroonians or Africans will work with very bad governments, very bad leaders that are exploiting their own country to the detriment of the future of their own grandchildren in the name of democracy. A true leader is the one who would elevate poverty from a nation where nobody cries. That's why you see Dubai today. It blows on. People leave Cameroon. Cameroonians leave Cameroon. Even ministers leave Cameroon and go to Dubai. This is Keita, who left Mali to go and take treatment in Saudi Arabia. You come to realize that with all the money that they have been embezzled, they are not able to build the kind of hospitals that they don't need. Risks only the risk to leave Mali and go to Saudi Arabia. That's a whole lot of risk.
Okay, it's a lot of risk. Let me take two more messages and then Apostle Ambe, you come in. This one says something is not right. Apostle, now let's look at democracy and the strength of the respective institutions. Do we see the institutions fully playing their respective roles as far as managing the different domains in our national life? For example, I'll take a clear example of a traditional setting where you will have, can I say, the Quiphon can say this is our role. The phone cannot be above it. We have some queen mothers that nobody does anything if it has to do with them. We have the Mambu that has its role to go and deliver a specific message, and when it comes, nobody. Do we see these democratic institutions in Africa playing their assigned roles?
Yes, when it comes to chiefdoms and fiefdoms, there's a certain level of democracy exhibited, because sometimes it is not just the king in most communities that make decisions. Sometimes when the king comes into a matter and it gets too serious, they say they shift it to the Ngomba. The Ngomba is a community of some elites in that particular community who are the elders of the land. They are the ones who consult and make conclusion. That is democracy, where it is not an individual who calls the shots, it's the community. Like a pastor a church, I used to grow up, when you do offenses in the church, I would dismiss you direct. They took it personal. So I had to shift power into the hands of the elders board. So when this person say it is the elders board, so you don't have grievances against a particular person because it is a bot. That is now giving power to an institution to execute. By then you don't have direct enemies, because you will not know who among the people of the board that made the decision to discipline you. That's a level of democracy. You see, even in our communities, our local communities, like you mentioned the Quiphon, there are some queen mothers that if they are not there, a girl cannot be given out in marriage. It is their basic right and traditional right. The king is limited to some extent. So if you look at it at the local level, I tell people that any leadership principle that works well at a micro level will produce the same effect at a macro level. If somebody is able to take a community, or for instance a local government like a mayor, and turns that place into a paradise, the same principles will be used to apply at the level of the nation. We should stop voting people who speak good grammar. We should vote people who have been able to produce results in certain things. Donald Trump has been a successful businessman. It is no doubt that the keys he used to expand his real estate management, he used the same keys to revamp the American economy. So we look at it critically that if you go to these chiefdoms and fiefdoms, we did not have a lot of power tussle to some extent, because why? Power was evenly distributed. The king himself knew his limits. and he couldn't trespass. So if we take it from that local community and we institute it at the higher level, we will still have the same result, but the issue is nobody will end up having any gunshot here and there. So I think that the primitive, let me put it that way, the primitive concept of democracy in our local chiefdoms and fondoms in those days, if it is properly enacted at the national level, it will reduce the level of tension in most communities. Because why? Democracy, let me say something. The forestry law of 1994 says when you are extracting law in a particular community, the government has 40%, the council has 40%, the king of that place has 20% and his leaders. When you take that 40% and you infringe on that 20%, you are stepping on someone's right. You may have 40% and lost respect for stepping into someone's 20%, because why? You have gone into his melee. Democracy is, well, even if people have a little level of authority, is being recognized. But that is not the case here. In this country, it is c'est la personne que tu connais détermine ta décision. You who you know in this country call the shots. There is a funny comedy on Facebook recently that if you go to America to look for a job, they will say, what can you do? You go to them and say, what is your qualification? You come to Africa, they say, who sent you? It is now based on who sent you, not what you can do and what's your qualification.
Who is your father? Where are you?
Who is your father? Where are you coming from? So democracy is when even if somebody has 5% right, you allow him exhibit that 5% effect, because why? You may have 95% and you infringe on someone's 5% right, it's no longer democracy. So what we practice in Africa is that those who have higher rights even manipulate, rigmarole themselves into the affairs of those who have lower right. Having higher right does not mean you should infringe on somebody who has a lower percentage of right. So I think democracy is when power is evenly distributed and people's rights are given to exhibit it. In my house, I am the authority, but when it comes to the kitchen, it's my wife. There we don't banter words. When we get the money for market, I don't go to the pot. I am limited in that area, but I'm the head of the house. My children, when they get up in the morning, they ask money for school fees. It's their constitutional, family, legal, village, traditional, community right to ask me school fees as their father. Even God himself knows. If I infringe on that right and a child abuses me, I have abused the concept of democracy. I will get the repercussions. That's democracy.
Yeah, but let's look at I cued you to our traditional settings. Let's look at the conventional settings of governance. We have other structures that are supposed to try to direct with the way things are done at different levels. So we have the judiciary that is supposed to look into issues of law, rights of persons. We have the National Assembly, we have Senate, we have all these institutions. Democratically, are they meeting the aspirations for which they were created?
Well, if you take the case of Cameroon, I will, want to believe that everybody watching us out there knows the answer already. That these institutions, the judiciary, the legislative, especially the newly created Senate,
the Constitutional Council.
The Constitutional Council, these are bodies that are answerable to just one man. We all know that. It's something that every Cameroonian knows. Now, I'm asking the question to know why Cameroonians and many other Africans do not participate in the political game of their games of their countries. Why is it that? The answer is very simple, and it goes out. It is another aspect of democracy that I want to look at, and it will come now to telling us the inefficacies of these other bodies that you have named, notably the Senate, the National Assembly, the judiciary.
Because all these structures exist here. They exist in our traditional settings.
The issue is
an assembly. There is a prime minister.
Yes. In our traditional setting, behold, Mr. Bean, in our traditional setting, the people of those communities, they understand the responsibilities of these people, and they cannot infringe to the rights, and the people hold these institutions accountable. They hold them accountable. This is your function. If something goes wrong at this level, you are accountable. So the people are educated from birth. And this is an aspect of democracy that is lacking in the contemporary, so-called contemporary society. education. We are supposed to learn civics or citizenship education in primary school and secondary school. And what do they teach there? That's the question that we are forced to ask ourselves. Do they teach people their rights? Do they teach them the responsibilities of administrative authorities of these various bodies? Do they teach Cameroonians and other Africans that these bodies are accountable to the people? I think that, or I don't just think, it is something that is very clear. People are very, very ignorant of their responsibility, first of their rights as citizens, and they are ignorant of the responsibilities of these institutions. Even the institution of the presidency of the republic, people do not know the responsibility that the president.
Do we really know the role of an?
That's what I'm saying. If you ask the common, Cameroonians,
do we really know their role?
If you ask the common, but see, I'm saying that this is an intentional move to keep the people in darkness so that they do not understand the functioning of these institutions. Because even at the level of the schools where they are supposed to be taught in civics, what do they teach them? They teach them names of ministers, names of the divisional officer of the subdivision, names of the senior divisional officer.
Yes.
That in no way, that's to memorize the name, and that man is going to go soon. So it is going to help the people in no apparent way. But the real thing that matters, that's the responsibility, the way the state functions. Because if people start learning civics from primary school to the university level, and they are taught methodically the responsibilities of administrative authorities and these various bodies, people in future, that's Africans, I'm talking about Africans because it happens in the Western world, Africans will be able to hold their leadership accountable. So I'm saying that an aspect of democracy that is absolutely lacking in Africa is education, and that explains why Africans are very reticent to participate in the political processes of their countries, notably Cameroon. Why is a country like Cameroon producing only a little above 3 million people to go and vote when we are about 24 million? And more than 3/4 of that population about more than half of that population has attained voting age. Why? Why do we get? Because people have not been educated enough. And I'm not blaming the people. I'm saying that it is the responsibility of the country or the state, of the powers that be, to educate the people. But there is a deliberate this thing put in place to block the people from getting this information, because they want to perpetuate themselves in power and they want to embezzle and be corrupt and get everything for themselves while the masses suffer.
Okay, while the masses suffer at Temibako, and how has democracy actually projected the African identity to the world?
That is the more reason why today Africa is addressed as a third world nation. It is because of democracy. You see, a country like Cameroon, we have problem of ID cards, where a lot of population and citizens have not yet gotten their ID cards, because you apply for it, they tell you that it's not yet out. But it will shock you that at the level of the UN, if you go into the Bureau of the Population and Aging at the level of the United Nations, they give you the statistics of the actual population in Cameroon. How can another country or a body tells you your population when you have not even yet issued out ID cards to certain citizens? You begin to realize that when it now comes to a period of election, ID cards begins to come out so easily, because they feel that democracy should be used at their own advantage to achieve their own gain. That is our problem here, Mr. Liu. You go into Europe, for example, you realize that the Europeans have set in a system whereby when you come into power, you already know what you are coming to foster. They have already put those guidelines. You only know what you need to carry forward. And they made it in such a way that how does it affect us? They understand that as long as this system is not being reviewed in Africa at that level, which I said that the member states of Africa are being held at the level of the World Bank and the IMF, at the United Nations, Africans will always run out of Africa, because democracy is being projected in the Western world as the greener pasture nation, where everybody feels that in order for you to achieve your goal or your dream or your vision, you must not be in Africa. You should be in Europe, because there you come to realize that they have put in a system where whether you work, you are protected by your salary, you get your pay. If you don't work, the government gives you a wage for not doing anything. They give you about close to 1 million francs every month that is ensured for every citizen. You realize that the kind of democracy which they are doing, they actually work for their citizens, and that is why they are able to reduce their own poverty rate there by relying on the African resources to keep them up there. Now, when you take our citizens that are running out because they feel that our own country do not practice democracy, the Europe or the Western nation use that labor population at their own advantage to increase their economy, because we don't understand the advantage of population. They have understood, and that is why they are able to build certain statistics that even our own head of state do not know. You may be shocked that you can ask certain questions to our administrator, they will be unable to answer. But go into the website of the United Nations, you see all kinds of classification and all kinds of analysis that you need to know. If you need information, that is the only credible place where you get any information, that no country can provide that same information by itself. So you come to realize that if we look at before the British and the French came to take over Cameroon, the system which the German put in place was even far better, because they made a certain treaty with the chiefs that they were like protectorates that managed the affairs of their own people, and knew that okay, if they will work with the chiefs will be able to distribute some of the power which has been endorsed to them. But now with this system that came into play, we realize that power is being centralized to one man, and that is what we still see at the level of the UN National Security Council. Power is in the hands of the America, the France, the French, the British, the US and China. In 1960, when the majority of the African nation had their so-called independence, which is a counterfeit, America put 100 billion down for the development of Africa with certain conditions. Till today now, we have now seen that in 2018, because America has now become one of the highest indebted countries to China and Japan. Now China is putting 60 billion down for the development of Africa, but they are not putting any condition, but we know what their intentions are. So you come to realize that the game over Africa is played at that level, and that is why I said that democracy, it is the minority that rules the majority, because these are the world's influential people. And until Africa begins to build leaders and assign leaders, I will say this, Mr. Liu, democracy was actually meant for the people to choose leaders that have already exhibited proof of leadership. It is not by magic or by miracle that leaders are supposed to be elected. That is not democracy. If you look, other people who became king, who became leaders in the Bible, they had already lived a life of very good examples. Then it is undeniable in the society that this man can lead us. But what we see today, you kind of see the kind of the people we have today. These are unproductive human beings that even in the capacity in which they sit, they are unable to carry their nation to a place where the nation is supposed to be. I cannot understand how a country like this will open its border for Mr. Liu, this is madness. You cannot take the country's destiny, I call that resources, the destiny of the people, and then you take that same money, instead of you creating banks in your own country where you put those money, or do investment in your own country whereby it can even create employment, for example, you take that money and still take it back and bank it out there. This is unheard of. Okay, this is unheard of. No, I want us to look at the concept of transparency and accountability compared from within our traditional settings, and what obtains in a clear democracy, even described as advanced democracy, like the case of Cameroon. Do we see the practice of accountability, transparency in the way things are done, because we are practicing democracy? That's not a question to even ask, but I'll be forced to answer it, because even the dumb that does not speak and the devil does not hear can hear from their spirit the level of indecency, malpractices, corruption. One of the aspects of democracy is to fight against corruption. There is no level of transparency as far as the system is concerned. As a matter of fact, once you enter into the system, they will always push you to commit crimes, so that you will not be able to stand tomorrow to kick against the system. If you dare, they will open your file of atrocities
and use it as a platform to keep you behind bars. So everybody in the jungle is a thief who is afraid to expose the history of the other. It's like the Ark of Noah, a combination of wild animals living in the same ark. Anyone that has the capacity to eat the other will eat the other. So when we talk about transparency, it is far-fetched. Why do I say so? There are a lot of people who have stolen billions in the country. There is nothing levied against them. You are a good thief as long as you are not fighting the regime in place. Your records will never be exposed. Your atrocities will never be brought before the court of law, and you will never be threatened for once. The moment you struggle to stand against the authorities that be, even if you stole a bunch of plantain, they will send you to prison for stealing a bunch of plantain and keep somebody who stole billions because the person is not against them. So you have to be like a sheep led by a shepherd to a slaughter without opening your voice. So what about transparency? It is very far-fetched as far as most African countries are concerned. There is no transparency. The body in Cameroon that fights against corruption is CONAC. If you go and check the record of CONAC catches the drugs that are brought in this country. CONAC catches the petrol that is illegally brought here. While there are people in the country who are more dangerous than the drugs and the petrol. There are people in authorities, there are people in offices, there are people in boards that swindle billions, and CONAC doesn't trace them, because even the CONAC person himself, to a certain level, if you open your mouth to speak, you'll be implicated, because even you have a file. So the whole system is so polluted and corrupted to this extent that it is difficult for another person to arrest another, because but one way or the other.
What is the problem? Is the problem the institutions or the persons?
The problem is the institutions do not even have the right. They are not empowered.
The institutions don't even exist.
They don't exist. They are not, even if they exist, they are not empowered. They are limited to a greater extent. We are in a system whereby our constitution is being drafted not to defend, our people are being raised not to defend the constitution, but to defend an individual. As long as you are singing the hosanna of the individual in position, your life is secured and better. Somebody told me clearly without mincing words, that it is either you join them if they are above you, or you stay frustrated. In other words, they are telling you that the system is so much tight in the way that even if you want to stand for integrity and righteousness, they will pull you down. So one of the things we must know is this: the earlier we start building strong institutions, like Mr. Balang said, the institution can be able, like in the United States, that the president will declare flight embargo, and a judge in the judiciary sector decides to bypass the flight embargo and open his own territory to put the fly in. That is to tell that power is not conserved in the hand of an individual. Building strong institutions, very strong institutions that can be able to trace people. Pierre Lumumba said when he was made the head of the commission against corruption in Kenya, when he began penetrating the ministers, it was the people themselves gang up and kicked him out of power. Because why? When somebody who has a torchlight begin to trace dark places, he becomes a victim. There is no way you can be able to stand in a place of justice and be able to fight at least 100 persons who are practicing injustice. They will do everything possible to swallow you. So what about transparency? We don't even have the institutions, and even if they are there, they are not being empowered to carry out their activities. Imagine if somebody becomes the president. If I'm appointed president of CONAC tomorrow, I can practice justice. But will the people around me practice justice? It comes a time whereby even as an individual, you want to operate within the circle, even the people within that circle start fighting you. Imagine you are the head of CONAC, and then you have a board of directors that work with you, and then you are a kind of straightforward person. The people who are working with you that think that CONAC is a platform for them to build their houses and buy their lands, they will start fighting you from within before the people you are trying to investigate will start fighting you.
Okay, good evening to you, Adetayo Bimisade, and to you, Moses Clinton, and good evening to you, Guam Amin, and Tabe Ebo Ayuk. Good evening to you guys watching us via social media. Now, let's see how democracy, since its inception in Africa, is concerned, has to do with the valorization of the African woman. Where is the place of the woman in African democratic practice?
Well, fortunately, some African democracies have started talking about growing African democracies, of course. They started talking about the place of the woman. But before I delve into that, I want to talk about, I want to reiterate the fact that in the African traditional society, I've already made this point, the woman was given her rightful position as far as decision making was concerned. The woman, even in certain African societies,
it was not. In my village, there are certain things that if those women come and say you are not doing it, even the phone will not do it.
I know a village around Babanki where it is the women's court that destituted the king. The phone. It is a women's court that took the phone and said, you are no longer our phone. And it was final, it was period. Nobody changed it. So the women had their place. Surprisingly, when we transited into the so-called modern democratic system, the woman was sidelined completely. And it is today that the world, or the African democracies, are recognizing the importance of the woman and even giving just a little, paltry percentage of leadership positions to women. So as far as the women or the woman is concerned in decision making, there is a very serious loophole in Africa. The African so-called modern democracy minimizes the woman. Mr. Bean, I will talk with anecdotes. I have been in the Southwest region and I've frequented many schools, government schools, and even private schools. I noticed one thing. For the several years that I was frequenting the schools and doing business with them, there were both men and women as principals. I mean, of a school. I'll take an example, lycée. Yeah, there were men who were principals of lycée. The moment a woman was brought to that school, the face of the school changed. I don't want to call names, it might undermine the personalities of others and maybe.
No, at the time BGS, the principal of BGS Moliko was a woman. The principal of GBHS Tico was a woman. At that time, GHS Limbe and GBHS, all women.
At that time, I am telling you with a lot of certainty that the face of those schools changed. There was a lot more transparency in the management, because I was a parent of lycée. There was a lot more transparency. I don't want to undermine the rulership or leadership of the men, but I'm saying that when it came time for the women to lead the schools, I saw a noticeable amount of increase in transparency, especially in lycée where I was a parent. I don't want to call names, I said that, but people should understand, watch my lips, you know where this is being directed to. So I think that the African society has to elevate the woman. I also know of one African leader who is a woman who has been one of the beneficiaries, one of the few beneficiaries of the Mo Ibrahim Prize of Excellent Leadership. She is Ellen Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia. So I think that it's going to be the interest of this country if we really, really want to develop and work in the interest of the African people, because that is what leadership is all about. Warren Benny says leadership is transforming vision into reality, and the reality is making the lives of the people better. If you cannot do that, then you are not a leader. Whatever else you are doing is dictatorship. So if Africa wants to transform the lives of its people, women should be implicated into leadership very seriously. Permit me, before I land, to quickly address one aspect of leadership that is, of democracy in Africa, that is a little worrisome. It is democracy and security. What do I mean by this? The platform of democracy was laid in Africa by the people, not by the leadership. When the wind of change came, it is the people who said, we want democracy now. Cameroon is a very good example. But when this democracy came, there was a lot of insecurity for the people. The people who were partaking in this democratic procedure, there was a lot of insecurity. I would call him in. When Nijon launched the party in Bamenda, he was kept, they wanted to arrest him. If the Bamenda people had not come out massively to block the roads, cut trees and put, Nijon would have been arrested. But even at that, he was kept under house arrest. And in future, when he won, when he purportedly won the presidential election of 1992, and the people were for the fact that he should get the power by force, Nijon the security at that hour was very fragile because the regime in place wanted to arrest him. It is the people of Bamenda who came out and blocked the road, and for a very long time he was kept under house arrest. The current case in Cameroon, 2018, where somebody declared that he was a winner and he wanted to go out and demonstrate peacefully, constitutional right, peaceful demonstration, he was caught up and locked. And that is the case in so many African countries. In Equatorial Guinea, there are the main opposition leader lives in Spain. You know, there have been a lot of talks for him to come back, and he says that he's afraid for his security. In former Zaire, during the reign of Mobutu Sese Seko, you know, Tshisekedi, he was on a constant exit, going on exile. So there is this permanent problem of insecurity as far as opposition is concerned in Africa. So it has to be, you know, cleared at the level of democracy. The African opposition should be given the security that they need to partake in the political process.
Okay. Good evening, Mr. Moderator Leonard. The panelists are wonderful. Apostle Ambe, Mr. Walang, and the other brother is Andrin. Congratulations. I just wish to know if these old men in this country are following this program. It is unfortunate Cameroon is a desert of dead woods of politicians. See the development of this country, Cameroon. No roads, no water, no electricity, no development, and we can speak out. And we can't speak out. Sad. Emmanuel is writing from Bamenda. Good evening to you. Greetings, Mr. Leo. I'm enjoying the program. It's time for Cameroonians to understand that building strong institutions is a legacy rather than loyalty to a particular person, whether being the head of state or any other person. I want to reiterate that here in Cameroon in particular has changed the meaning of democracy because the authorities in Cameroon are not put in place by the majority. I am Francis, also writing from Bamenda. Greetings to you all in the studio, especially to Apostle Ambe from Anyi. John Boo. Okay, good evening to you, Anyi. Hello to you too. Good evening to you people in the studio. As long as Europeans concept, there is no democracy in Africa because Africa has no decision on their own despite their so-called independence. Europeans are still controlling Africa. I'm Clapton from Three Corners, Fiangu in Kumba. Good evening, Mr. Leo. Dr. Fidel is writing from Three Corners, Fiangu, Kumba. I really enjoy this your program. Your panel today is the best. I enjoy the way each and every one of them, when they speak, please keep up selecting the best. God bless you. God bless you too out there in Kumba. Good evening, Mr. Liu. My regards to all the panelists. We thank God for this channel. They are really constructive, and we pray the powers that be should hear what they are saying. Otto is writing from Bafoussam. Tabot Machiavelli writing from Yaoundé says, people are ignorant of their rights because of the irresponsible attitude of the executive arm of the government, which has engulfed all powers to itself, the gendarmerie, police, and the military. Okay. Good evening to you, Tabot. Good evening, Mr. Liu. Our colonial masters make 2 terms in office, but African rulers stay for life. Master Henry, writing from Kumba. This one says, good evening. Good evening to you too. Good evening, Mr. Liu and members of the House. I like your program, for it educates so much. And adding to Apostle Ambe's talk on who sent you and what can you do. I am a victim of that statement, for I was in Lycée Mbangong in Yaoundé. I don't know what happened, but at 6 a.m. I got up and dressed up for work, and when I got to the job site, the police met me at the job site, checked the house and neighborhood, asked for my identification. I gave them my identification card, but they took me to their car and took me into the school premises, and when one of them asked me what I'm doing outside, I told them I'm in the job site, but they asked if the house is owned by Frank Biya. So this country has no democracy. As to the context of democracy, Jarvis is writing from Yaoundé. Okay, Jarvis, I don't know what to say. Good job, Prime R. Ngwa is writing from where I don't know. Good evening, Mr. Liu. Boris from Bamenda. I enjoy Apostle Ambe. He merits his titles. Okay, I don't know what title you're talking about. African democracy is quite different from that of the Western world, Africans use democracy as an umbrella and violate the rule of law through dictatorship on independent institutional framework to maintain the status quo. Now, Andrin Atemebako, let's look at democracy and social cohesion and political inclusion. Do we think that democracy as practiced in Africa has brought Africans together or has further divided the nation?
I think that I want to believe that was the main topic why we came here today to discuss. Because like I still say, it is in my interest to emphasize how democracy has been very destructive to the African continent, based from what we have experienced till today. And until the Africans need to understand that we must stop acting by proxy or copying what others are doing, because the contexts are never the same and the cultures and the traditions are not the same. So we must be able to redefine what fits our own people and what upholds the spirit of Africanism, because at the end of the day, we are not Europeans, we are not Westerners, we are Africans. So that means that if we are, it's just like, for example, a man takes his dress who looks very fat and gives to a man who is small to put on. The dress can never look the same like it looks on a man who fits him. And that is why I'm still saying that democracy has not only destabilized our economy, has also destabilized our population and has increased poverty. For example, in a country like Cameroon, in 2007 to 2014, Cameroon was able to produce 8.1 million poverty people who live under poverty line, which was about 35 or 35.5%. In 220 that we are talking today, that has also increased due to the civil conflict that we're having. Where are these people gone to? All the internally displaced persons, the ones that have fled due to the conflicts in Cameroon, where have they gone to? Because at the end of the day, what I'm simply trying to say here is that this is a strategy which I still say the 15% against the 85%. Let me explain this a little bit. The 85% is the population of Africa, which is a targeted profit by the Western nation, and the 15% is a protectorate which we call the government, whereby by no means where a 15% can live in a country where you have 85% of people who live below poverty line. That means that a poor man can never have a decision and never have a willpower. So they understand that the poverty in each of those countries will cause the citizens to have a mentality of corruption and deception and lies in order to survive. That means that it's a survival of the fittest, where your brother falls and you walk on him. Nobody can apply moral rules anymore, and that has also affected our birth rate because of poverty rate. So they understand the interest of how, when a country becomes poor, where the government lives on loans and credits to support its country, whereby it only increases taxes to pay back its loans. Like they understand that no matter how much money that your country borrows from the IMF, from the World Bank, it can never pay that money back, because it will only try to increase the taxes and continue to labor and push its people into abject poverty just to keep the price of those that are above him. So in order for Africa to start redefining what democracy is, Africa must disassociate himself from what I call the globalization or civilization and learn to live together by living apart. We have seen in UK is still receiving pressure from the EU for not joining the EU. The United Kingdom is away from the EU. And what am I simply trying to say? But these are all Western imperialists, and you have to do what fits you. So I don't understand how Africa today, since 1960, the leaders that had received, the countries that had received independence, these are still baby leaders that are still putting on diapers. Because I don't understand, since 1960 you have not been able to free your country, you have not been able to bring your country into sovereignty, and still here we begin to talk about democracy. You look at their immigration policies. Before you enter Europe, you need to pass through an Atlantic Ocean, which many Cameroonians and many Africans have died there. But our own borders are open to all of them. They even enter here without visas. Some of them take diplomatic passports and enter here when they are not even diplomats in their country. Many of them are living here who are nobody in their own country. But yet we open our doors for them to come in here. Take, for example, a country like Cameroon. You talk about democracy. How do we emerge?
Yeah, when we talk my focus was how inclusive Cameroonians, Africans, in deciding their destiny.
social cohesion.
Yeah. Do we see many more persons excluded in the political and the state apparatus?
It is clear that is why a lot of youths are not interested in politics. That is why a lot of people are not involved in politics, because they have come to realize that take for example, in a country like Uganda, everybody now is rushing into the government. In the 90s, nobody was interested in politics. Everybody was interested in the private sector, making something for themselves. But when they start realizing that the government becomes the largest employer. In other words, the government is the one that holds the whole fat of the nation. It causes now the people to begin to cease to develop themselves, and that is why you realize that the private sector in Cameroon is not developed. Cameroon has taken a loan for that. But how do we emerge whereby our social population or our population get involved in politics? People will say, I'm not involved in politics, but politics, you are involved in politics whether you like it or not, because politics becomes the umbrella that affects every nation.
Okay. Greetings to you all. We enjoy your program. I'm Legend Basil, writing from Germany. Good evening to you, Basil. Good evening. Definitely, democracy has destroyed Africa. It is the white man's strategy to disintegrate Africa, and they have succeeded. Caleb, writing from Ghana, says, greetings to your panel. From Kumba, good evening to you all. Hope those old people are watching this program. This one says, oops, very long. Hello, I don't see how you can approve of a country being democratic and at the same time classifying its leaders a dictator. Let's look at the definition of a dictator: a person exercising absolute power, especially a ruler who has absolute unrestricted control in a government without hereditary succession. What is democracy? A system of government by the whole population or all the eligible members of the state. Stop calling. Bachu Ernest, writing from Nyasuso, special greetings to you. Bezawung Victorine is writing from Yaoundé. Bezawung Victorine, thank you for your definition of democracy. This one says, democracy is so complicated, we have to be careful with our words. Amin Shu, writing from Boya, I agree with you. The man in white, okay. I want to read this message. It says, I made my daughter write a question just for you to read messages from your friends. Or is a program for Bumenda persons only? No. Your question is, how can we hold African Union accountable for the imperialist imposed fake democracy in Africa? From MK, writing from Garua. MK, I'm just reading the messages as they are coming. I'm not selecting them, please. Good evening, sir. Greet that young man on the screen for me. I appreciate that. Okay, he has gotten your greetings. Okay, now let's look at Apostle Ambi. Let's look at democracy, its survival, and the place of our traditional rulers, culture, tradition in Africa.
You see, there is a British diplomat that said he walked the length and breadth of Africa and saw no unjust person. He saw no criminal. He saw a people with a very good culture. He said the only way to penetrate those people is to break down their culture. The people were too decent, organized, respect for authority, submission to hierarchy. It was difficult for the Europeans to penetrate Africa until they destroyed the African culture. The democracy we are talking about that came into Africa has come to destroy our values. We had values in the community. My mother, for example, got married to my father. My father, to some extent, was not that responsible. Sometimes my mother, we will get angry and tell my mother, Mama, don't give our father food. My mother would tell us that according to the culture of the village, if you don't give your father food and he happens to die, the entire village will stone you for starving him to death. That's a level of submission to authority. Democracy came in with women's emancipation. I want to start dealing with facts and analysis. From the women's emancipation, we realized that most women began equating themselves with their husband, of which the idea of women submitting to a husband is a biblical truth. Women submit to your husband, husband love your wife. There's a competition and power tussle in most homes now, because why? The idea of women emancipation came into the African society by the so-called democracy. Number two, we respected the institution of marriage. Adultery, fornication, even though took place in the African culture, were not treated with any form of levity. People who committed adultery and fornication in those days were stoned to death. As a matter of fact, if you were a girl that was tested after marriage for not being a virgin, you were taken back to your father's house. How did they convince us to stop polygamy and start practicing homosexuality and lesbianism? That is what democracy brought to us. It abused the institution of marriage. It abused that sacred harmony of sex, which is the democracy they brought to us in Africa. I'm wondering the kind of government that came to dismantle our values. The disrespect for superior authority. Right, in some clans today in Africa, like in the Yoruba clan, it is obligatory for a young man to prostrate before the authority as a sign of submission and surrender. Recently, former President Olusegun Obasanjo went down and prostrated to his king in Ibadan State. Democracy came to take away the respect for authority as far as the African custom is concerned. So if we look at it critically, the democracy that infiltrated the African community came to steal our values. And once these things were existing, we did not have so much problem in the society. Today, there's disrespect for son and father. They said child's right. I'm telling you about human right. Children will call police people to come and arrest their father for correcting them. In Africa, yeah, my mother will tell you that go and pick that corn outside. Before she finishes, she has given you 9 punches on your face. You pick the corn in humility. You cannot slap a child in America. He will call the police. That's the democracy they brought for us into Africa. So you see, they gradually and technically penetrated and cracked down the values of our culture. Our kings in those days were not just kings, they were elders. The disrespect for age in Africa was not part of the African culture. It was only brought into our system. I want to show you the damages of the so-called democracy in the continent Africa. So what they came with democracy, or as democracy, is actually to manipulate the values, the culture, the dignity we had. In those days, there is a tribe in Namibia. They were using metals to do surgical operation when you have problem with your head. Whites came here, stole that technology, went back, developed it, and then damaged the idea. Our children were being born with leaves. They have told us today that you must born in the hospital. And more people die in theaters, labs. They die in labor room than they were dying in the days when children were born with traditional leaves. Is to tell you that everything that you see the white man doing, they only came, collected it from the traditional perspective, went and modernized it, and then killed the mentality of the traditional aspect of that virtue. So if we say democracy came into Africa, it has destroyed our women under women emancipation. It has destroyed our children in the name of child's right. It has destroyed the sacred ministry or the office of sex in the name of homosexuality. It has also destroyed the capacity of the woman in terms of submission to authority. That's democracy that they brought to us. Coming to our educational system, we did not have a kind of formal education, because there is informal and formal. The informal educational system, people depended on their IQ and their acumen to solve matters, like in the days of Solomon, who did not go to any school and brought 2 women who were clamoring over a child. By wisdom from God, he was able to detect. Today, we have lost the sense of our common sense. We now read what has been put on a piece of paper. It has definitely blinded the actual understanding. That's the reason why we are now teaching young men to start depending on their potentials, not to depend on some 4 paper that was given to the university as a degree in theology, a degree in sociology, a degree in anthropology. There are about 6 degrees that will lose their potency in the next 6 years. Number 1, marketing. Those of you who have degree in marketing, marketing is getting digital. to the extent whereby they will not need you again to carry goods from one place to another. Second, banking and finance. Banks are getting digital that you will not need a teller to sit somewhere and fill a form. People are getting digital. The third, I'm sorry to say this, my brother is here, but I know he's getting digital. Journalism. People are building news blocks on different platforms that sometimes you will not even need a journalist to tell you an information. The next is anthropology. Except you will study and become a professor to come and lecture, because in the nearby future you will have no relevance in the society. These are things that, if at all we use our natural skills and acumen that God has deposited in us, we will replace informal education for the formal they gave to others, taking us to nowhere. Our parents never entered any class, but they were able to solve crises in the village. They were able to solve matters and even cure sicknesses that today we need to be operated upon to treat. I wish to ask, was there any fibroid, and how was it treated before operation came? How did they carry out operation for brain tumor before this thing came? So I think that democracy has just come to rob, R-O-B, steal, S-T-A-L, manipulate, and rigmarole the African culture.
Okay, well, Apostle, thank you for that. Okay, but we are doing digital because people can watch us on social media. We are already we are already there. So we are not waiting for the 6 years to be taken back. Now, yes, because they can watch us across the world. We are adapting to the evolution of information communication technology. Now, Walang Abang, democracy and the family structure, it is true, he has already talked about it, and the morals of our communities. Has democracy come to make us to be advocates of our rights? At least we are imposing ourselves, we know our rights better, nobody plays around with us, and the families are better organized today?
Well, I beg to differ that, you know, on the aspect of rights, democracy has come to enhance our rights. Like I said the other time, you know, the advent of democracy in many African countries, the opposition leaders, even the former president of Senegal, Abdoulaye Wade, spent more than 8 years in prison. You know, so the concept of democracy brought an atmosphere of insecurity for those who were facing the incumbent leadership in those days. So the issue of rights was a far-fetched dream for the common man, especially those who were militating with the opposition in those days. Yes, permit me to address an issue that you spoke with the other panelist. The name is Adrienne, I'm sure. The polarization of the communities. I think that is that is the essence. The way democracy did, as democracy destroyed Africa. I think that it's a very important point that we should, you know, take the time and explain to Africans, Cameroonians, so that they understand. Democracy has, more than anything else in Africa, polarized the African communities. It has divided the African communities along tribal lines. I will use only the case of Cameroon to demonstrate a good example. In Cameroon, prior to the coming of democracy in 1992, you would hardly hear of Bamilekes in Yaoundé or Bassas in Ngaoundéré, Bamoons in Douala. You would hardly have heard anything of that sort. But with the advent of democracy in 1992, which came forcefully, we started hearing things as Le Bamenda La. C'est la chose de Bamenda La. Thereafter, it went to a position where they said, power belongs to a certain people of the South. It was their thing, and anybody who wanted to be in their good books must support that via power. Till today, that is what still exists. I mean, it has dichotomized the society.
And recently
so that
we have
les Sardinard et les Anti-Sardinard. And I'm talking only about Cameroon. Today you have Bamilekes, you know, against the Bulus. You know, these are conflicts that are instilled in the heads of the people by both the ruling party politics, by both the ruling party and the opposition. they are encouraging the division, along tribal lines and putting tribes at loggerheads. I mean, breeding a lot of tensions.
But we have in villages people who no longer talk to each other because they belong to different political parties.
Because they belong. I mean, even in the same village, you have people who have brothers from the same parents, father and mother, who have been divided because they belong in different political parties. So I think the kind of democracy that we have now in Africa has caused more harm as far as African cohesion, unity, harmony in the African community is concerned. The democracy has brought a lot of damage, and it is orchestrated by highly placed party officials, both in the ruling parties and in the opposition parties, wherein the person who doesn't support their ideologies, you immediately consider them as your enemies, as people who are not supposed to be where you are, or who are not supposed to talk to you, or who are not supposed to
blacklegs.
They are blacklegs, and so on and so forth. Let me quickly analyze this case of Nigeria. In Nigeria, the Igbos belong, the issue of power has polarized the Nigerian society, wherein it is said that people of a certain extraction cannot lead Nigeria. That is the Igbo.
Yes,
it's either the Northerners or the Yorubas. You understand? It is the same thing in Equatorial Guinea. So the African politics has polarized the African society in such a way that if care is not taken, the collapse of Africa, because Africa is limping, it's barely limping now, but Africa will collapse further if this issue of party politics that divides people across tribal lines, across political lines, and across ethnic groups, if it is not addressed seriously by African leadership. I am accusing African leadership. I don't blame, but I'm saying that African leadership has a responsibility, a major responsibility in this polarization, and the issue should be addressed if we don't want to cause a carnage in Africa, where brother will be killing brother, sister will be killing aunt, mother will be killing father, and children will be killing siblings of the same household. So African leadership includes both those in power and those in the position.
Okay,
we should be able to sit face to face and look at each other in the eye and say, let us stop this madness.
We are all Africans.
Yes.
So greetings, Mr. Liu, and a special greetings to Mr. Walang and Apostle Lambia. Have been out of range for a couple of weeks. Nice having you on again, Reverend Father Bertus Sanji, who should be writing us from Bamenda. Greetings to you. Mr. Liu, your program is very interesting. It is difficult for Africans in general and Cameroon in particular because of ethnic consciousness. Now, can we also, what he's demonstrating, is it very, very practical with what is happening in Cameroon? I'm talking about the Anglophone crisis.
Yes, it's very practical, and that is why we are discussing the issue, because we are talking on how destructive it has been to the African society. So the examples are too much, but what I want to say to the viewers at my media prime at this hour is that you must understand the motive behind democracy. When the League of Nations became the United Nations. And that is why you realize that in 133 years when they sat in Berlin to divide Africa, that was a strategy for the divide and rule. And that is why I said that our only way forward will take our unity. Otherwise, we are not going anywhere. Because you look at, that's why I said I don't believe in political opposition parties, because the mentality of the politicians are reduced to village mentality individuals. They don't see where the country is being blocked at that global front. And that is why I said that if youth should go out and protest, they should go out to vote another youth, not to keep an old man in power. Because the old people and the system of democracy we are seeing today in Africa only takes the blood of youth to keep the old people in power. We see now in Ivory Coast what is happening in Ivory Coast is another clear example. How many persons are being killed in Ivory Coast because one man changed a constitution and said he's going in for a third term, and his grandchildren are on the street dying and being killed by military, and still yes, he still persists to stay in power. So you come to realize that this is how destructive democracy has been to us. We know the people who are behind democracy, and we understand that they instituted democracy to foster the Western civilization in the entire globe. That is a simple truth. We saw in September 11, 2002, how George Bush entered into Iraq and enforced democracy by removing Saddam Hussein and enforcing a democratic system, because the greatest resistance that democracy has faced in the world is the Islamic the Islamic world. In the African society, it has penetrated it because of Christianity. They realize that, okay, the Africans are already religiously minded. And that is why if you read the story of Wansimus in those days, when you were taken as a slave, the first thing that they give you is the religion of Christianity, that you must become a Christian, and you are taught to say the Lord's Prayer, so that at the end of the day, when you gain your freedom, you never come back to revenge with your master. And that is why you realize that Africa today are killing their own brother, but they can never kill a one white man who is the one destabilizing their own political system. You go into all our prisons, you find our own brother. Go into the Western nation. I'm saying this, Mr. Leo, because I know what I'm saying. I've traveled in all those places and I've seen. Our black brothers populate all their penitentiaries. Why? Because they understand that population is economy. In those prisons, when you are put there, they contract with certain companies and take projects, and the prisoners do those jobs there at a very low wage, while the government takes a high income from those companies. So it is a huge interest for Africa to remain in poverty and keep working in compliance with these evil leaders, which I said that the church is supposed to come out, like in the days of Idahosa, who prevented the well witches and wizards that were supposed to come and hold a meeting in Benin City. As I gave another example, until we begin to take open declarations to go out and begin to charter our own destiny, otherwise Africa is going nowhere. So you look at the democracy in Europe. A child gets to 12 years old, is already given the right to choose whether he wants to become a lesbian or a homosexual. A child is already having a boyfriend at the age of 12 years, and the parent has no right to instruct that child, because the child, according to their own system, is owned by the state, is not owned by the parent, because the government gives you child support from the day that child was born. So they have made the system in such a way that it is a government that has power over the society and over the community, and that is why I say it's a minority against the majority, and democracy is the highest deception of the age until we begin to redefine it. It is something that the Western nation has hijacked from history, because God used this system to ensure a better life for Israel. And that was the same system that most Christianity or most churches were supposed to be practicing, and causing the Christians which they have in their churches to exploit and to be of exploit in their nation. But today we don't see the same system that democracy uses in extracting and exploiting and exploiting the population of the world. We see the thing that happened in Libya. The oil for food. In the days of Kofi Annan, he did not release a document why America went into Libya. They had a hidden agenda. So at the end of the day, you come to realize that not only have they cracked down our values, our culture, they are embedding their own system, because the Germans say in order for you to come to Germany, you must be able to speak German. Because in Germany they speak only one language, and you cannot work in Germany if you are not speaking German. So the language is a culture, and that is why they began giving all the language which is called English and French. Like I still saying, I followed a certain program of Poswambe at Afrique Media. I only cried when this conflict started in late 2016 in the Anglophone region. If the English people in those two regions have the mindset of creativity and visionaries, whether you have been marginalized, you will shine like Joseph in Egypt. I have seen places where people have been enslaved, but because of their IQ and their ability to bring out what the world will need them and make them become peculiar, they were able to beat down and crack down that marginalization. So when a man begins to complain of a problem and does not begin to look for a solution, that man is a lazy man.
Okay, we are out of time. Let me take some messages, and then we are lastly out of time. Good evening to you all. I'm very much satisfied today because of my media prime. If the other TV stations will be doing same, I think Cameroonians will learn something better. Thanks very much. Take care, Anise from Tradex Village in Douala. Good evening to you. One of your panelists is disorderly in his presentation, talks without okay. Are you live? Not to be read. Okay, good evening to you. We are live indeed. Good evening to you people in the studio. The panelist is wonderful, just to indicate that the apostle speaking there, but making statements. You can't say that modern medicine is having adverse effects on the health of Africans is dangerous. You say people die in hospitals now more than there was no hospitals. Do you have facts? Those are mere hypotheses. Okay, okay, I'm sure. Yeah, I know where that should be coming coming from. Okay, this one says day where they have you kept Christianity. It's difficult to read the messages because it just keep coming. A country like China says no to democracy. Massa Henry, writing from Kumba. Good evening to you, Massa Henry. Good evening, sir. Greet the young man on screen. For me, I appreciate what he is doing. Okay. Good evening, Mr. Liu. Wonderful interventions from your panelists. Democracy to the white man was a way to control and modify Africa. People like Gaddafi wanted the best for Africa, but Europe and America killed him. African presidents still have a chance to put things right, to follow their own way of leadership. Okay, Emma is writing from Boya. Oops. Suraju Muhammadu from Bamenda says, I love the program. Good evening to you. Good evening, sir. I'm Paul from Yaoundé. I support the man who is just from talking 100%. Okay. Oops. This one says, hello, Leo. The apostle is right to term democracy as democracy, like what is practiced in Cameroon. I love the Pan-Africanist Bisok. I am Yange Yeman African Threshold Ntabesi Nkwen in Bamenda. Good evening, Mr. Liu and co, the panelists, especially Apostle Ambe. Thank you, people, for educating us about democracy. Apostle, keep it up. Esther is writing from Yaoundé. Greetings, Mr. Liu and all the panelists. Democracy is not an African jargon, but foreign. So Africans are just trying to fit in. Let the Africans go back to their system of governance they were practicing before coming of the West. Alain Fabrice is writing from Douala. I think democracy is not a term we can inscribe on African. Instead, we are instead fooled with this concept, but in other parts it is instead new colonialism which we are exploited, and as such we Africans are covered with black cloths in our eyes. Maldini is writing from Limbe. Good evening, Mr. Liu. Love your program. Good topic is Julius, writing from Great Support in Buya. Good evening, Mr. Liu. Saying that democracy is being abused in Africa is an understatement. Democracy has been raped and given a dictatorial practical definition. How I wish our leaders could be held responsible to pay for diverting its definition. Prince 4 is writing from Douala. Good evening, Mr. Liu and the crew. Your panel is always excellent. We are only hearing of democracy in Cameroon. It has not yet reached most African countries, and Cameroon in particular. Okay, Martin Akompenyi of the city of Kumba. Unfortunately, I have to end here. I know many will say, why am I not reading your messages? Time has cut us short. We want to thank you while I'm coming all the way from Boya to be part of this edition of the program.
Yes, it's always been a pleasure. I know I've not been around for a while. I hope I'm going to be, with your permission, I hope I'm going to be
more
regular now on this panel. I want to say special greetings to the wonderful audience that is out there, and to my brilliant co-panelists who have amazed even me. I mean, I'm so delighted to be here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Apostle Lambe, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Liu. Thank you, my co-panelists, for the wonderful contribution. Thank you, Cameroonians, for giving us your ears to contribute our own quota of inspiration to better our society and the continent Africa.
And to you, Andrew Natem Ebako, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, all the viewers at this hour of my Media Prime, and I hope that our ideas have been able to give in some small light to the people out there. Thank you very much.
Okay, we equally want to thank all of you who took time off to watch the program, especially a special greetings to you, Philip Ben, who is watching us from South Africa, and to the millions of televiewers who are watching from across the globe. Stay blessed. Bye-bye.